Welcome everyone to the Formula SAE Rules Overview. Thank you for joining us today, and a big thanks to the SAE Detroit section in partnership with the SAE Carolina section for hosting this event. I am Matt Meyer, a General Motors EV propulsion engineer, a longtime SAE International Detroit section volunteer, and your moderator for this presentation. Before we start, I want to address a couple housekeeping items for this live presentation. All participants are automatically muted with their cameras off. We do encourage you to use the chat function to ask any questions you may have. You can start right now. I will take your questions and ask them to the presenter at the appropriate time. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the SAE Detroit section YouTube channel at a later date. If you're already watching this on YouTube, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who might find it useful, and subscribing to our SAE Detroit section YouTube channel. You can find other past presentations related to the Formula SAE competition on the SAE Detroit section YouTube channel. You can also follow the Detroit section on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram. And if we move to the upcoming events slide, the last item is that the Detroit section will be hosting more live Formula SAE presentations and Detroit local student events in the coming weeks. If you would like to join our future live presentations or any of these other events, please make sure to go to our section website at www.sae-detroit.org to register for these events. Today, we're going to be hearing from Steve Sayovitz, Formula SAE Rules Chair. This discussion will allow you to learn about the latest revisions to the 2024 Formula SAE rules. Welcome, Steve. Thank you so much for being here today.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. And thanks to everybody for their interest in hearing about the Formula SAE rules. So just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Steve Sayovitz. I am the Formula SAE Rules Chair, as well as the Formula SAE National Scorekeeper. So, but different functions when I'm on-site versus off-site. But I've been doing that now for quite a few years. And I'm pleased to give you this overview this morning of some of the Formula SAE rules for 2024, as well as some of the other things you may be interested in hearing about related to the rules. So this morning, we're going to be going through and looking at 4 different areas as shown on the screen. And what we're going to do is at the end of each session, we will pause and we'll take any questions that have been submitted to that point. As Matt described, please submit your questions through the chat function at any time during the presentations. If you wish, you type a little slow or something, we can catch any leftover questions at the end, as well as at the end, there will be an opportunity if you want to discuss any other aspects or anything that's come up. Just as a reminder, this session is what you hear is not necessarily an official position or a defined answer. So with that, let's get started. The Formula SAE rules are actually the top level document that we work with for the Formula SAE and Formula SAE electric competitions. They are the top level, but they apply equally to everyone. They give the requirements, or in some cases, give the options that we would allow to meet the rules. The rules themselves, however, are not the only document involved. There is things like the structural equivalency spreadsheet. We also have the electric systems form, excuse me. We also have a cost supplement and some other guidance documents. The rules themselves are also we're not looking for them to be a puzzle or something for you to figure out. We're not giving you pieces of information and expecting you to figure out the one right answer based on that. The rules are also not intended to be guidance for you. So it just gives the requirements, but less so the guidance. And we're not dictating specific designs. You'll notice there's options for tubing materials, composite materials, metallic, non-metallic, a lot of different options for that. The way to think about it is the rules are the requirements, and they're consistently for consistency between teams, safety, and general design soundness. So one of the things about the rules is the intent is to provide as much design freedom to you, the teams, as possible. So if there's a specific requirement, one solution, that is stated in the rules. Sometimes there is a requirement that is given, but it's not real specific. In that case, there may be multiple acceptable ways to meet the rule. An example of a specific requirement is like the main roll hoop. That is required to be a steel material of a given size. The chassis itself can be made of a variety of materials. Even the front hoop can be made of different materials. So think of it that way. We sometimes get questions about, well, what is the intent of this? Well, it's not specific. So I think we're trying to, as much as we can with the rules, make the allowable box, and you stay inside the box and you will be legal. Something else we want to clarify is the terms used in the rules. What does this mean? Well, that actually is already in the rules, General Regulations 6.1. So requirements are must. Must not means don't do it. The question sometimes is, well, what does should mean? Means it's something that we expect you to do, but it is not a strict requirement. So think of it that way. And then may is purely giving a permission. So things that we may do. One of the things I always suggest to teams is that they keep a copy of the rules. Keep that handy so you can refer to it. I know not many people print them electronically or print them anymore. They use them electronically. That's fine, just to have that available somehow. And then go to each individual rule when there's a question. Why should you do that? Think about it. Which is more accurate? The printed rule or the rule that is in your head that you remember or maybe think you remember? So with that, we will pause at this point and take any questions that have come in or anything else at this point.
Hi, Steve. There are no questions yet. So just a reminder to everyone that has joined us today, please use the meeting chat function to ask your questions. Thank you.
Okay, with no questions, and please remember, if you do have any questions, you can still add those and we'll catch some at the end. So with that, let's start talking about some of the changes for 2024. We'll cover some changes in the structural area. I'm just going to hit these as highlights. These are not all the changes. There are over 250 individual changes to the rules for 2024. Most of those are actually minimal impact clarifications, fixing typos, rewording, that type of thing. But there are some changes that are more involved or things that we've chosen to highlight that you should be aware of. So in the structural end, the front hoop itself, you'll see the two rules there. If the front hoop is not made of steel, we want you to drill a hole in it so we can measure it directly to validate the thickness. Any mounting plates used for the front hoop to attach to the chassis, there are some additional details on those as far as the construction and the thickness of those. And a new rule this year, if the front hoop is laminated into a monocoque chassis, we want you to leave a 25 millimeter gap so that we can inspect the hoop itself. So that's changes related to the front hoop. The shoulder harness mounting bar. What we're looking there is we we only want the shoulder harness itself and potentially the head restraint mounted to it. Other non-structural loads may be acceptable, but what we do not want is mounting anything like the accumulator or the engine or the suspension to feed loads into that mounting bar. Because obviously the shoulder harness mounting bar, if the shoulder harness is stressed, that mounting bar needs to be able to do its function. And we don't want any other loads complicating that. There have been some changes to the laminate testing. So the test panels now must actually use the thickest core that is going to be, we don't allow scale up of the core anymore, but core scaling is going to be limited to 50%. And then the test data from the laminate tests may only be used up to 50 millimeters of deflection. If you think about it, a laminate deflecting 50 millimeters, that's already got some problems. So that's what we're looking to do there. Another change to laminates and then the monocoque is we want you to have an inspection hole in a non-critical location of every regulated section. Again, that's really there to expedite tech inspection. We can check it very quickly then. Impact attenuator. You'll notice last year there was a table with a bunch of requirements. Well, that's now much simpler. So position is actually simpler, and we've added some clarification to the orientation of the impact attenuator, and in fact, broke that into a new subsection. The driver harness mounting tabs that used to have some cross-sectional area requirements, those have been removed, and they now specify a load that aligns with the loads used for the monocoque chassis structure. And you'll address those in the structural equivalency spreadsheet. And then for each of the harness belts, there's additional guidance on mounting requirements. It's really not changing what we've done previously, but it's giving you those several different options. Because what we were seeing last year was that there were some unusual configurations or fabricated structures that will now no longer be permitted. So those are the changes in the structural end. And a resource that you can use is there's a website called designjudges.com. Although not official, it does contain some very good information. And our structural equivalency spreadsheet lead has posted articles there before. The one specifically is Guide to the 2024 Frame Rule Changes. And that explains some of these and some of the other items that were changed for the frame rules. So I suggest if you're not aware of that website, that's a good resource to go to.
So Steve, I received a question on slide 6. It was clarifying the definition of terms. I'll read you the question. It says, for rules that describe should or should not, does that provide the technical inspector the ability to pursue either end of that rule? For example, should turns into a must.
Generally, the should rule is the recommendation specifically. Now, per the rules, when you get into tech inspection, the tech inspectors do have the authority to review anything related to the rules, but any other items that are potentially of concern as well. So a should not be a must necessarily, but it may depend on the particular application. Because tech inspection is given priority because that's actually looking at what's actually been entered. So that is considered to be the go, no go for the vehicle itself.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Continuing, we had some changes in the areas of the vehicle controls section. There are some specific steps now for the accelerator pedal. that are actually moved, used to be in the separate powertrain sections, but now they're consistent. The pedal travel term was introduced and made consistent throughout the rules. So not a lot of changes there, really just moving and reorganizing. The brake system section has been revised, but it's really formatting and consistency. What I do want to mention, though, is the new section, Technical 3.2. That is breaking the brake pedal, pedal box, and mounting into its own section. So part of the reason this was done was to clarify that the brake system and the brake pedal box are not necessarily tied together. Because one of the most common questions we receive, since fasteners in the brake system must meet the critical fastener rules, we get questions about, well, if we mount our pedal or pedal box or adjustability, do we still need to meet those critical fastener requirements? Because again, the term brake system was read pretty broadly. And what you'll see now is that the critical fastener requirements are imposed in section 3.1 for the brake system, but they are not imposed in section 3.2 for brake pedal, pedal box, and mounting. But please remember that good engineering practices are still expected. Remember, you can put a lot of force on that brake pedal and pedal box, so we're giving you some options there as to how you might be able to configure that for adjustability. But just remember, there's a force limit given in the rules. There should be no question at all that it will take that much force. So don't try to engineer it for just barely passing that force item. Make sure you engineer that application properly, because that is something that will be looked at in technical inspection. We have some other things that we've actually simplified, or at least tried to simplify this year. For compressed gas cylinders, the mounting must be inside the chassis. That means inside something we can call the chassis. There are other requirements for gas cylinders, so if you do have a compressed gas cylinder, please review the rules and make sure you comply with those. Low voltage batteries also must be inside the chassis. Where we've run into some problems before is having those, say, hung off the side of the chassis. That is not acceptable. So just have those inside something we can call the chassis. And a simplification that I think many of the electric vehicle teams might appreciate is the tractive system firewall. Now it needs to be made of aluminum and grounded. There is no requirement for an electrically insulating layer. And by aluminum, we're really thinking something more than, say, aluminum foil or tape. In all of these simplified requirements that I just mentioned, we'll see how it goes in 2024. If there are some additional requirements that we need to implement, we will. But at this point, we're going to see if those simplifications will be good, that the teams can still accomplish what they need to accomplish and get something that works well. Okay, some additional rules changes relating to the electric vehicles. We did clarify with the energy meter that it must measure the tractive system power, both supply and regenerative. And power and voltage limits apply to supply and regenerative. So in other words, it's only looking for the 600 volts, 85 kilowatts, but it's looking for those anytime. And relating to the energy meter, just as a reminder to the teams, your energy meter is going to be installed and removed at the event site when you get to technical inspection. So consider that when you're designing your accumulator container and that installation. The energy meter also needs to be accessible for downloading and to clear the memory. And ideally, you can do that without having to open up the accumulator container. Ideally, you just plug in and do that. If you have to open the accumulator container, you obviously have to go to the electrical work area, which may not be very convenient to do depending on how your dynamic event schedule is going. So please consider those aspects when you design your accumulator container. The grounded low voltage system. We have a specific stated requirement that it must be able to operate with the accumulator container removed. That is really not a new rule for this year. It just is making that very specific and stated up front. Because what was happening is it is possible to use a DC-DC converter off of the accumulator itself to power the low voltage system. While that in itself is not necessarily banned by this, if you do that, you still can't have any power or energy exiting the accumulator container when the accumulator isolation relays are open. So you see how it's kind of been the requirement all along, it specifically states that. The maintenance plugs, when you open up your accumulator container, those need to be directly accessible without any removing or moving of other components. And the maintenance plugs are used to try and separate the electrical packs. And that's more of a reminder. For cooling fluid on the electric vehicles, the liquid coolant must not directly touch cells. And what this is an implicit ban on any type of direct contact cooling, be it a spray or an immersion. That would be very difficult for both you to execute and for us to inspect at competition. Now, overcurrent protection on branch circuits, that is actually an added requirement for this year, just clarifying what specifically that we are looking for. Grounding, I already mentioned the grounding on the tractive system firewall. The indicator lights for the accumulator management system and the insulation monitoring device must stay on until those items are actually specifically reset. So any kind of a latching behavior, if you want to call it that. And then I do want to mention transport of cells or segments, because this section was added, these items, after the public comment review. So if you have any extra cells or segments, they just need to be transported in a suitable container if they are not in the accumulator container themselves. Now, also, I want to mention that there's two other rules: electric vehicles 10, which is event site operations, and the electric vehicles 11, which is work practices. Many of those steps were moved into those two new sections. So trying to group those related steps, trying to make it a little bit more concise in terms of the on-site operations aspect. Please make sure you review those before your team arrives on site next year. So with that, if there are any questions relating to these areas of rule changes, we can take those now.
Steve, I received one question it's in the previous slide in the simplified requirements area. For the low voltage battery location rule, does within the rollover protection count as within something that can be called as a chassis?
Within rollover protection, most likely yes, because rollover protection, as long as it's inside the members as listed, that should be fine. Again, there's a specific question on the location. You can always ask that in a rules question. Hey, I think this is okay, but could we confirm? We can do that, or you can check at technical inspection.
Okay. And another question was just posted. May I know when the ESF is coming out?
Can you Sure. Can you hold off on that until I get to the section on document reviews? And I'll address that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank
That
you.
is the last question.
Last question. Okay. And again, if you have any other questions on those, please feel free to put those in the chat and we can cover those at the end. A couple other changes I want to discuss and get into a little more detail. There's a change to the endurance laps score for 2024. You remember we previously had in the rules 1 point per completed lap, a total of 25 points for completing the entire endurance run. In some cases, that was okay, but we wanted to give some little bit more freedom on this. Our endurance courses are very different. The May event is 10 laps running on the back straight as well as through the infield. The June endurance is 22 laps on the back straight only. Well, as you can tell, point per lap for 10 laps, that's not so good, but point per lap for 22 laps, that's not bad. So what we did is in the 2024 rules, it does not specify any specific point requirements. It just says up to 25 points. So that gives us some more options. We can do things like points per lap. We can do some multiple point levels, bonuses. Maybe if you get to driver change, we can give you a certain amount of points. Or maybe another option would be maybe in the first driver, it's 1 point per lap, second driver, 2 points per lap. A lot of different ideas. I know the endurance captains were pretty excited about that, and they had some good ideas. We haven't decided the exact details yet, but we will communicate those prior to the event at each competition. So that's endurance. It's not really something you'll notice a lot, but it's something that you need to be aware of. The bigger change, though, is on the efficiency scores. So what happens here is historically, looking back, the way the efficiency rules are currently written, we got scores for combustion vehicles that were anywhere from 30 to 40 points all the way up to 100. Scores for the electric vehicles were, say, 80 to 100 points. And there wasn't always a good distribution of scores. So what happened there? That means that really efficiency wasn't even worth 100 points. It was effectively worth, in the case of the electrics, maybe 10 to 20 points, plus a bonus for qualifying, in a sense. Well, when you're only scoring 10, 20, 40, 50 points out of 100, is only really what it's subject to, that reduces the impact of the event on the overall result. And also, so you're only giving 10, 20 points difference, why should you even care about efficiency? So let me show you some charts that illustrate this. You can see on the left, these are plots here of the last 4, 5, 6 years worth of efficiency scores. On the combustion side, you'll see there's actually not too bad of a distribution, but it stops about 30 or 40 points. There are a couple of exceptions, but those are just exceptions. The bigger deal is with the electric scores, as you can see in the plot on the right. So you hardly even get down close to 80, usually closer to 90. So there's really not as much, looks like there needs to be more of a change on electric than there does on combustion, but both could actually benefit. So wanted to make a change that would try to spread scores more through that 100-point range and try to make that relation between the energy, the time, the efficiency more obvious and create some incentive. If you can gain some points in efficiency, that could really affect what you might be looking at here. So what's the change? Two things. The scoring is on a linear basis now, not a curve anymore. And for electric vehicles, we're actually reducing that maximum energy limit that is used to score efficiency. But one thing did not change. The eligibility for efficiency has not changed. If you scored points in previous years, you will score points again in this new change to the scoring. I do want to mention even though we did change the maximum energy limit, we reduced it, there is no limit on accumulator capacity. The accumulator design and capacity is a very important design consideration that your team has to address. And there's many parts, they're all interrelated. It's not just capacity. Capacity is part of it, but you also have some other factors that come into it as well. So when you come to the design event, we'll be very interested to hear about your considerations on your accumulator capacity. So what does this now look like? Here's what this looks like going back to last year for the fuel efficiency scoring. This is the combustion event, Formula SAE. And you can see from the left plot that the 2024 rules now score in a straight line, relating the fuel efficiency factor to the efficiency score. You will see on the right screen, that is the place, overall finishing place in efficiency compared to the number of points. And you can see it does help spread it out compared to the previous result. Instead of going down to 40 points, now it goes down to about 20 points. But as you can see, once you're away from the top, point values start dropping off faster than they did previously. That is the combustion event itself. For electric, the change is more dramatic, as you might expect. So here's the difference with electric vehicles. Again, this goes back to last year's Formula SAE electric results. As you can see just how much of a difference the linear scoring and the lower allowable maximum limit makes. Huge difference. In this case, we had one team that had notably better efficiency than their counterparts. Well, as you can see, by the new rules, they would gain a lot of points from this. But as now you can see, instead of a minimum of 80 points, there's a minimum of about 10 points. So that is the changes to the efficiency rules for 2024. And with that, we will pause again and ask if there are any questions relating to the rules changes for endurance and efficiency.
Steve, there are no questions on the efficiency side or endurance. I did receive a clarifying question from slide 6. I can ask you it now or at the end.
We can hold that till the end.
Okay.
All right. All right, well, let's continue then. Document submissions. Just not a little bit earlier this month, there's the document submissions. The deadline are open. The deadlines for those documents were posted to FSAE online. So if you go to the menu bar, you click deadlines, you get this view that you see on the screen in front of you. This is new this year. I kind of like this because they're all there and visible. So those submissions are open now. You'll notice that one of the submissions is due December 1st, and that is your fuel order if you are a combustion team. That's a little different. That used to be in the spring, so pay attention to that. You will see that the deadlines for some of the electrical forms are in December, and some of the structural equivalency is January. So just be aware of those. Now, there was a question earlier regarding the electrical systems form. And the news on the electric systems form is, barring any last-minute edits or problems that our reviewers are looking at, that should be available for 2024 next week. So I know that been a couple of questions on that, so we would expect that to be next week. The structural equivalency spreadsheet template was released. It's already been revised once. So that is available as well. For the electronic throttle control, if you are a combustion team running electronic throttle control, there will be a new form this year. It is going to be called the ETC systems form, rather than the failure modes effects analysis, the FMEA. And that, I do not have a current date or status on that, but just be aware that that will be a new form this year. Before we go to the next slide, I do want to point out this particular field for the due date. Why did I want to point that out? Well, please submit before the due date to avoid any penalty points. The cancellation date as listed is not the due date. There's been too many teams submitting late in recent years, and I wanted to clarify, if you submit after the due date, you will get some penalty points. So please be aware of that. And as always, please, if you can, submit early. Some of the reviews are in progress right now. In fact, a quick update, I looked this morning for structural equivalency spreadsheets. We've already had 36 teams submit a structural equivalency spreadsheet. And of those, we've already accepted 9 of them. So thank you to those teams for getting those in. And actually it helps us out because we can kind of work through and make sure some of our newer structural equivalency spreadsheet reviewers are doing a good job on that, which they are. And this is actually a big step forward from last year, because last year in October, we had 2 structural equivalency spreadsheets accepted. Again, this year it's already 9. So thank you. And if you are a team that maybe is a little unsure or you need a little help with that, if you submit your structural equivalency spreadsheet early, our reviewers might be able to work with you a little bit more in getting that completed. Now, does that mean you can submit a partially complete one? No. But if there's some aspects and areas that maybe you need a little guidance, a little assistance, try your best and submit it. And if not, sometimes our reviewers are willing to work with you closer on that. And as we get closer and closer to the deadline, more and more teams will be submitting, and the review load will go up for our reviewers. With that, I'm going to open it up again for any questions that may have come in related to document submissions.
Steve, I received one question. Is the electric throttle form required to submit if you are an electric team?
No, it is not. The electronic throttle control systems form is only for combustion. The assumption that we make is that if you are an electric vehicle team, then you are automatically electronic throttle control. That is addressed by the process for the electric systems form.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Any other question at this point?
Nope, that was it.
All right. As always with the Formula SAE rules, please feel free to give us any comments you have and provide feedback. Think of it this way. How can we make it better? If there's something you think that would help it or that we could do, please let us know. There's several ways you can provide input. I always recommend the generic email at collegiatecompetitions@sae.org, because that will always be available. You can also speak to individuals who are involved with the event. You can provide some feedback based on some of your document submissions. I try to work closely with our document reviewers to find out where some of these issues are and try to see if we can improve some of those things. And obviously, once you graduate, please consider volunteering to help us out. We always welcome some new people to come in, especially in the areas for document reviewers and technical inspectors. And document review is something you can do from wherever you are and during the year. So with that, I appreciate that. And I thank you. I thank you for your attention on this presentation. With that, again, we'll open it up now for some questions and discussion. So are there any remaining questions in those areas that we covered? Or is there anything else you might be interested in and might like to discuss?
I received a couple of questions. The first one is, will there be a change in energy meter for the EV competition?
Okay, that's a good question because what's happening with the energy meters is we produced a number of energy meters several years ago, and because there's more and more teams now entering the competitions and passing tech, we're kind of running short on those. But the existing energy meter is having some issues where we aren't going to be able to produce new copies of it at this point. So there is currently a new energy meter that is in the design and design phase being looked at by our electric vehicle experts. We do not expect that to be ready for 2024. Ideally, it'll be ready so we may be able to test it, but it won't be used for anything official. So once we do have something there, we will communicate that to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to follow up on a previous question that I received from, I believe it was slide 6. Is anything being within anything considered the chassis? Does that also apply to compressed air cylinders as well? I believe we were talking about the low voltage battery. Can we also consider a compressed air cylinder inside the chassis as well?
Yes, that is in fact the rule. And what you'll do for the start of that, we'll be looking at any locations for compressed air cylinders or low voltage batteries as part of your structural equivalency spreadsheet. Really, all you'll need to do is just show it on some of your illustrations. Say, here's the location, and then we'll take a look at that and give you the feedback. Yes, that's fine, or no, we'd like to see it something different. But yes, both compressed gas cylinders and low voltage batteries would need to be inside something we can call the chassis.
Okay. I'm getting a few questions in now. There was a comment. Can you please restate the comments regarding the energy meter mounting, low voltage, and power draw?
Okay. The energy meter, going back to our covering, I'm assuming this is going back to the changes to the energy meter low voltage system. Yeah, the energy meter itself, it was a clarification. The change was a clarification that it's both the power going out of the accumulator and any power coming back in if you're doing regeneration. So just again, the power limits apply always. That was really the question or the issue there. For the grounded low voltage system, that needs to operate without an accumulator in the vehicle. Translation, you need to have some type of low voltage battery powering it.
Okay. There was a question / clarification comment made. I believe it was about 2 questions ago. It says, "May I clarify that whatever you have just mentioned means we will be keeping the same form factor of energy meter for the 2024 competition?"
Yes, it will be the same physical energy meters we have used previously.
Okay. Moving back to an ice question, in the case we have a clear fuel filler neck, also used as a sight tube, does a clear reinforced vinyl tubing would pass tech inspection?
Yeah, I think what we ask there is that you provide that to us in a rules question, and we'll take a look at that particular material. Generally, if it's a clear filler tube material that is able to survive contact with the fuel itself for a period of time. Offhand, I don't know what materials have been allowed previously, but yeah, our fuel station will have some more information on that, and you can ask that in a question.
Okay, thank you. Can teams request changes to future rules?
Yes. But obviously, if you are looking at doing a change to a future rule, Now, again, I suggest you could probably email that to the collegiate competitions at SAE.org or discuss that with someone involved. Generally, what we would like to see is what's the problem right now? How is that rule not as good as it should be? And what should that new rule be?
Okay. At competition, who is the best person or persons to answer rules questions?
Well, it depends on the particular area you're talking about. If it is, in fact, like if you're in the tech inspection area, you'll have various tech inspectors, but there are also some lead tech inspectors that they would actually be able to answer many of those questions. If it becomes a real rules question, what'll happen is a couple of us will get together, generally, say in that case, it'll be like the tech leads, perhaps myself, and we'll discuss real quick about it and decide what we would do at that point. If it is, for example, a static event, there are event captains or lead judges that you can interface with to answer any of those types of questions. If it is a dynamic event, there is an event captain for that as well. Generally, the dynamic event captains wear a pink vest just to make sure that they are identifiable. So that would be who would be able to answer those questions.
Okay, thank you. I will make one last call for questions. Please use the meeting chat function to post your questions so I can ask them to Steve. I'll wait on that. My last question for you, Steve, that I have is there a certain area of the rule books or certain types of rules that you think troubles most teams?
Well, some of it I see is there's sometimes a little bit of experience that's involved. And sometimes having gone through the process of being at a competition helps tremendously in terms of knowing what needs to be done and where the problems are. I've always suggested for teams who maybe aren't quite done with their vehicle, maybe they want to go through the competition for the static events and for some tech inspection just to get that feedback and make them that much better for the next time. I've also suggested that if a team has never been to a formula competition, that they go without a vehicle so they can at least take a look, talk to a number of teams, get a lot of that information and input.
Okay. Thank you for that, Steve. I don't see any more questions. If you can, I think we're going to wrap this up then. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today. Please remember, we have one more virtual event next week. It's our next virtual event, along with many others, on November 3rd. It's Weight, Center of Gravity, and Moments of Inertia. You can register by going to the SAE-Detroit.org webpage and clicking on the register button. Big thank you to all of our participants for joining our review today. Big thank you to today's presenter, Steve, and the SAE Detroit section staff, as well as the SAE Carolina section staff, for their involvement in putting together today's presentation. For any questions or inquiries about this presentation, please email the SAE Detroit section staff at events@sae-detroit.org. If you're watching this on YouTube, please remember to like this video, share it with someone you might find it useful, and subscribing to our SAE Detroit section YouTube channel. Have a great day, everybody.